This video covers the remainder of the Chapter 45 event cards, the second half of the chapter. The first event is the Birmingham Campaign. It goes along with this picture here, and the year is 1963. Now, Birmingham was chosen as the site of a major campaign for the civil rights movement, specifically because it was arguably the most segregated city in the country. Segregation ran extremely deep, and so Martin Luther King Jr., other civil rights leaders, felt like this was the place to take the civil rights movement, to really go at the heart of segregation, deep in the South, Birmingham, Alabama. Dr. King and other protesters had some difficulty getting the adults in the city to buy in because it was so segregated, and they were afraid of reprisals and consequences if they were to speak up and take part in the protests. So King had a hard time really getting traction in the Birmingham campaign. While he's in jail in Birmingham, he writes one of the most famous pieces of writing from the civil rights movement, aptly called Letter from a Birmingham Jail, that really lays out the rationale, the reasons behind civil disobedience, nonviolent protest, as a way to attack segregation. It's really a fascinating letter. In the absence of a lot of adults stepping up, interestingly, children in Birmingham, teenagers and even elementary school age children, stand up for their rights. And the Birmingham campaign really comes to a head when police use attack dogs and fire hoses, like full pressure fire hoses that would be used to fight fires, to break up protests. And the pictures of these protests, of attack dogs being used on children and firemen knocking down teenagers and little kids, and the jails overflowing like you see in the picture here. These pictures are sent out around the country and around the world and really shine a light on this discrimination, this segregation, and ultimately cause the Birmingham campaign to be a success. The top leaders of the city are either kicked out of office or are forced to agree to desegregate. Also in 1963, later in the year, the March on Washington. This happened in August 28th. More than 250,000 people marched in D.C. At that time, it was the largest political gathering ever held in the United States, 250,000 people. And this was the site of Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous "I Have a Dream" speech. For a lot of people, one of the highlights of the day. The March on Washington was certainly not the only thing, but was one of really the major driving factors to force Congress to finally take action on segregation and discrimination. And it led to one of the most important laws of the 20th century, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, Congress certainly wasn't of one mind on this. You had senators who filibustered, right? They used their privilege of unlimited speaking time to try to stop the bill from passing. But under the leadership and guidance of the president, Lyndon Johnson, the Congress is able to get this bill passed and signed into law. What did it do? Basically banned discrimination. Got rid of segregation and said it is illegal to discriminate against people because of their race, their sex, their religion, their national origin. And this is rightly considered a landmark law and the most important civil rights legislation to pass since Reconstruction after the Civil War. Following the Civil Rights Act, Southern states resisted in areas where they could, and they still pushed hard to try to eliminate African Americans from the voting process, to eliminate them from the political process, which led the very next year to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Southern states had been using to great effect things like literacy tests, poll taxes, and the such to keep African Americans from voting. So the Voting Rights Act made those illegal. They said you cannot do these things to deny African Americans the right to vote. And the act proved to be pretty successful. Following the Voting Rights Act of 1965, voter registration for African Americans in the South shot up by more than 2 million. So 2 million people who had effectively been denied their right to vote. The Voting Rights Act solves that, or helps overcome, I should say, that barrier, and allows them full access to their voting rights.